Hello, everybody. Welcome. So, yesterday I had a technical problem. For some reason, during my recording of the talk that I'm going to attempt to give again today, for reasons I don't really understand, and I'm pretty techie, to put it mildly. I've been working with computer tech, Apple tech in particular, since it was invented as a technician. But yesterday something happened that I don't really understand, and it is that when the phone was outside my purse, it recorded fine, but when it was inside my purse, with the headset connected properly, it recorded from the iPhone mic rather than the headset mic, which produced a disastrous, unintelligible recording. I seem to have solved this problem now. I think I've got actual recording going on, thankfully, hopefully. So we'll see if I can do justice to the topic that I spoke of yesterday, which was retrospective concern, right? Hindsight. And so this is something I've recently been reminded of, but it was very clearly shown to me during my encounter with Toymaker in 2002, a non-human intelligence that lit me up with insights from outside human cognition. I like to think of this as being taken out of the cage of my humanity and shown what it looks like from a perspective so far beyond it that it renders most of what humans think and do into poorly crafted toys that are very dangerous. I was shown this feature of retrospective thought and its dangers in a specific array of situations. Now, it's always really troubling when I, spend an hour or two making a recording, only to later discover that the recording doesn't exist or is unintelligible or something. And this is one of the risks of making recordings. If you're not monitoring the input visually, or if no one's monitoring it, you don't know what's happening to it, right? It could be just recording, gibbledy-gab or purse noises or whatever. Interestingly, when I was testing the recording today, because I had no idea what happened yesterday. In fact, I posted the recording on YouTube, set it up, wrote the description, everything. And then I received a complaint, hey, it's just a bunch of noise, are we in your pocket? And then I re-listened to it, and it was, in fact, a bunch of pocket noise. But weirdly, when I tested the mic today, it was doing the same thing, which is quite difficult for me to understand precisely what it is that was going on, unless, of course, my phone has been somehow infected by, either spyware or malware or something, which is entirely possible, circa 2025. So the appearance of the problem was that with the phone in my hand, it records the headset mic, and with the phone in my purse, it records the iPhone mic. So weird. Disconnected and reconnected the headphones, cleaned the leads, all this. Still the same problem. So as a technician, I used Hindsight to, right, have you tried power cycling it, right? So I power cycled the phone, problem disappeared. But it's still incredibly hard to understand for me because, right, how does the phone know it's in my purse, quote unquote? The only obvious input to the difference between being in my purse or being in my hand, I mean, there's a couple of inputs, right? There's light. That shouldn't really affect the microphone. And then there's motion detection, right? Which is different. It's going to produce different feedback when it's in my hand and in my purse. Really hard for me to imagine how either of those things could switch the mic from the headset mic, which I'm using now, to the internal phone mic. No idea. That is a mystery. Glad it's solved. So, it's always troubling when I make a recording and later discover that it's not been recorded or that something's wrong with the recording. And this topic is really important and turns out to be relevant to this feature of the problem of recording, right? Turns out to be relevant to my topic of hindsight and retrospective concern. Because suppose I make a recording. I mean, actually, one of the most important events in my life was like this. I wrote, while having the most monumental epiphany of my life, I wrote 150 pages of text, approximately, and saved it. It was there, checked it, updated my machine's OS. There was a crash during the update. What was lost was only that document, right? Irretrievable, cannot recreate it. The epiphany crashed along with my computer. So whatever it is I wrote then is gone from, humans and me. Turned out that the next time a similar epiphany happened, that was the moment of introduction to Toymaker. So when I lose a recording, I have some choices, right, in terms of how I evaluate it. And I can totally come down on the side of loss. The universe is unfair. How could this happen? I'll never be able to recreate that. These kinds of natural feelings. Or I can adjust to actual circumstances and the possibility space and move forward in freedom from such concerns, with the understanding that many times historically something that wasn't recorded was improved later. It was better than it would have been the first time. Even though occasionally the magical thing, right, my 150 pages of maybe the most important text I ever wrote, it's gone forever, I'm destroyed, right? Everything is ruined, it's an apocalypse, So, one of the features of that problem is, do you stay trapped in the feelings of loss over a past that failed to become a future, or do you engage the possibility space openly, intuitively, playfully, intimately, creatively, and simply proceed to new developments? Right? And this turns out to be a pivotal feature of problems with humans and hindsight. So I want to shine some light on some of these problems today. And I don't know if I'll do as good a job as yesterday. I was, in a mood. But we'll have a go at it and see what happens. I'd like to introduce a trope from the Bible, which is a very strange book that was pieced together by certain councils in various epochs of human history. Some books excluded, some books included, some books modified, so forth. It's not univocal. The Bible does not speak with one voice, though humans can perspectively establish that position in consciousness and thus interpret the Bible as though it is univocal for them. They can also go around declaring that it's univocal to other people. It is the writing of God, for example. Well, it might be true, but there isn't any writing that isn't. If there's anything like God, there's no writing that isn't the writing of God, because God, having been the origin of all writing, is necessarily entailed in the act of any writing. Right? So, people might want to argue with me about this. I'd be happy to have those arguments if they're interesting. But it's important to understand that human interpretation determines the values we derive from experience and phenomena. Whether that interpretation is emotional, spiritual, rational, lawyerly, and so forth, or not. So, there is no way to, quote, objectively get outside the human field and then see what is the case. Because what is the case doesn't exist separate from interpreters and participants. Yeah? And so the participant deciding to inquire into what is the case or what was the case necessarily transforms the situation. There's no way outside that. However, the possibilities of abstract thought, which establish in awareness a simulation over the continuum of all possible observers, right? And then we decide, well, everyone would agree that that is water. Not true. Because their concerns will determine what what evaluations and analyses they perform. This is a really huge problem. Okay, so there's this trope in the Bible, and I want to be very clear. It's a common Christian fundamentalist trope that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed due to sexual profligate behavior, profligate sexual behavior. This is not the case, according to the text, according to, a more clear interpretation of the text. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because they were vicious to strangers, right? To visitors, to companions. They were vicious to them. They treated them with extreme disregard. And this is a problem that we now see rearing its vicious and inhuman head in the United States where I live, vis-a-vis immigrants, quote unquote. There aren't any people here really who aren't immigrants. At least the dominant population is all immigrants, right? The original peoples, if they themselves were even original, they must have emigrated at some point unless they just arose here, which is conceivable. But the original population has been decimated and dominated and largely destroyed and so forth. So everyone here is immigrants, and singling out recent immigrants as bad or not worthy of concern or respect or love or compassion is insane, right? It's just viciously wrong and stupid. So Sodom and Gomorrah were not destroyed due to sexual profligate behavior, though we do conserve around the word sodomy a specific form of sexual behavior, which Christians like to specifically frown upon, although they would, they've captured they've weaponized the whole domain of human liberty, right? Anything you do is lethal and bad. We have the answer. Come join us. We'll redeem you, right? Declare your fealty to so-and-so and you'll be saved from the hells that we've invented. Most religions and ideologies in extremis become weaponized like this. Wildly unfortunate for humans and the world. But there's a trope here, which is the trope involving Lot. And I'll briefly encapsulate my crude memories of the story. Angels come, and these may be, transcendental beings. They may simply be human beings who are messengers, because messenger is one of the core ideas associated with the concept of angels. But they come and visit Lot, and they tell him he will have to leave and take his family because Sodom is going to be destroyed. And there's a bunch of people outside, we must assume men, because, this is generally the problem. And it was men that put the books of the Bible together, in case that isn't obvious, regardless of our concerns about the reality of gender. All of those guys who did that had, male genitalia. So the messengers come, and they tell Lot that he has to leave, and that Sodom will be destroyed. And outside, there's a bunch of people who are demanding that Lot either give them the angels or his daughters, because they want to, quote, know them. Now, it's relatively obvious from the context that what this word know means isn't we want knowledge of them, but rather is we intend to rape them, something like this. We intend to implement the problem in Sodom for which we have become famous. So it's not clear to me what Lot does. I can't remember. I think it's not clear whether he sends his daughters out or not. I just don't recall, unfortunately. But he doesn't send the angels out. And then Lot and his wife, who I think remains unnamed in the story, and his daughters, they leave Sodom in the night, as I recall. And, they've been given an admonition. And this is the pivotal feature of why I'm introducing this trope from the Bible. And the admonition is, when you are leaving Sodom, do not turn around no matter what happens. Do not look back, right? And obviously there's some kind of pseudo-apocalyptic thing going on around Sodom. It's being obliterated by something from the sky, possibly an asteroid or whatever. And apparently, not certain about this, but I think archaeologists have discovered Sodom, and they found things like, charred stone and stuff that you wouldn't find, anywhere other than an asteroid strike or a nuclear explosion. So they're leaving Sodom in the night, and they're frightened, and it's very difficult for them to, collect up all their belongings and take them to a new place with their family. And Lot's wife becomes concerned as they are departing, and she hears the tumult and perhaps explosions behind them, and turns around and is changed into a pillar of salt. Now, this is a very strange figure. Right? But the reason that I'm introducing it has to do with what happens when we employ hindsight. We have this other trope, hindsight is 20/20. And part of what that means is that we may be able to see where we got something wrong, or we departed from virtue or love or the spirit of origin in relation or circumstances, or how we might have avoided an accident if we had done something differently. Yeah. So there are many features of hindsight that are useful. I'm not trying to demonize the entire affair. And yet, we need to look carefully at some very serious problems with looking backwards. So, human awareness, it's not necessarily that it has something like a physical anatomy, granted the physical anatomy of our brains and nervous systems and bodies. Rather, what it seems to do is on the fly and over time, repetitiously, forge certain kinds of faculties and organs of awareness and then deploy them in the space of our interiority. What we think of as our mental experience. It's not merely mental. When we are thinking, it is mental. When we are feeling, something else is going on. It's not merely mental. So, the mind forges organs. And one of the central problems for humans is that any organ that gets forged can become hungry, right? And it can dominate our awareness or identity to such a degree that we may engage in actions that we would never otherwise engage in. Or we may be compelled by the perspective of a dominant feature of awareness or function in awareness, such that we are lost, right? The breadth and depth and beauty and potential of my humanity collapses into, for example, court cases. Now, this does involve features like those that we refer to with the word conscience. But what I want to point out are some specific problems with retrospective thought. Let's see here. Lacking the inspiration and natural flow I had yesterday, but I'm going to have a go at this nonetheless. Sometimes under certain circumstances, I think I will mention that people who partake in marijuana, particularly if they partake irregularly or rarely, and then suddenly, under some impetus of situational efflorescence, they smoke some weed. Right? Some of them will become what is usually referred to as extremely self-conscious. But it's not really just self-consciousness that is happening there. It's a strange form of conscience-driven paranoia that I've done something wrong, I have been wrong, I said something that was misinterpreted, I wasn't seeing from the perspective of others, I was just in my way of being, and so I have violated something. And I've had this experience, and it can become completely overwhelming. Like, it can become physically overwhelming. Now, the experiences of intoxication that humans have are broad and varied. So I'm shining the flashlight on this one specific aspect on purpose. When I think back to a moment where I did something bad, I defected from my own heart and spirit because I was caught up in something. I was checked out, I was dissociated, and so forth. It's very painful to reimagine what took place and not feel the incredible shame and pain, agony, guilt, and all of those feelings that arise when I'm reliving such an event. I'd like to give an example, even though this is extremely painful for me. It's not as painful for me as the beings who were affected. So, one day in my youth, I had become fascinated with a friend's BB gun. It's a Pump Daisy. And I was out at the levee, sort of tooly, choked, brackish water. And I shot the BB gun arbitrarily without aiming it. I just sort of turned and shot it. Immediately thereafter, I noticed a mother duck. She was appearing injured, right? Turned on her side in the water in a strange way. And I presumed, which seemed reasonable at the time, but I now know not to have been the case, that I had accidentally hit her with the shot. This is not what took place. I didn't do the math. The shot was not aimed at the water surface. But seeing her apparently injured, I presumed that I had injured her. And then I felt that having done so, it was important that I finish the job. Now, those of you who know me know how sensitive I am to living creatures and animals. And at the moment, I was very compelled by the power of the gun. So I pumped some shots into the mother duck with her children watching. And I cannot possibly, there's no way for me to process this that comes out okay, right? So when I raise this vignette in my consciousness, I naturally have very painful feelings. And it feels like I have ruined everything in the universe. Absolutely agonizing. Though I'm remaining in the moment in order to continue the recording, I'm resisting the urge to actually fall into the gravity of this memory. And the memory itself is important. I don't want to get rid of it. It's crucial. I can learn and change and be a better being and human and organism and so forth by remembering this. So I'm not claiming that we shouldn't have retrospective concern. Unfortunately, however, not at all. Just give me a moment. So let me try to clearly outline the problem. When the mind forges an organ whose purpose is the evaluation of historical events, generally, right? Unfortunately, there's also a hidden purpose, a number of hidden purposes. And if one of those is indictment, right? If it is the establishment of a courtroom post hoc after the event, much like the way our courtrooms largely fail to function in modernity, but abiding similar principles, yeah, and motivations. When the goal is indictment, the problem is that the nuance and the intimacies and the situational complexities of the feature of history we are analyzing become distorted by the purpose of indictment. And we are not aware of this transformation. We simply think that, no, these are true and good evaluations of historical fact. This is not the case. So, being unaware that purposive motivations are being smuggled in to the interpretive aura around some historical moment, we take the product of these motivations as true or real, good, the facts, and so forth. None of these are the case, almost never. Abstract thought and the aspects of awareness that become involved in the formulation of court-like dissection and analysis are deeply problematic, and we should maintain an awareness of these problems while not allowing that awareness to prohibit us from such concerns, but rather to take them less seriously and be aware of the underlying motivations being expressed in the formation of an organ of awareness that has the features of the personalities of a courtroom. A judge, a prosecutor, a defender, a jury, the defendant, the audience, and the plaintiff, right? So when we employ retrospective awareness, the features of awareness split, and they split into functions that resemble those of a courtroom because we've been trained to think this way in childhood by watching courtroom dramas and understanding how law works and all of this kind of thing. We've also been trained to think that wrongdoing is an accounting game. We count the things, we do an accounting, and then we produce somehow some very stupidly forged punishment or reconciliation. Yeah. The reconciliation is important. Punishment is mostly insane.
Hey, how you doing? Do you know sorry, just start walking down.
Hey.
Two things.
Sure.
I'm trying to get.
All right. So we had a little interruption from party goers. The Outside Lands concert is happening here today. Where was I? All right, so when we forge this organ is a bit like, it does dissection, right? It dissects memories into parts, and then it applies judgments to those parts. And it's pretending that it's objective, but it isn't. Particularly if we have forged the purpose of indictment, right? Because now it has the features of either a prosecutor or, a defender, an attorney. And these features are not announced in awareness, so we are inclined to suspect that the way it makes the cuts and the judgments it associates with them are true or veritable or righteous or something. If we were actually broadly minded, when we turn backwards in awareness to look at history, we would recognize some problems. We see histories as relatively complete, set in stone, and unalterable. None of these features are true. In fact, histories lead to our present moment and the possibility spaces. They inform the character and features of the possibility spaces before us now, right? And so by transforming our behavior now, we may not be able to change the events of history, but we can radically transform what they mean, right? What they come to mean. Yeah, you can tell I'm struggling because I'm using filler words, which I generally try to avoid. So let me recompose for a moment. When we do not remain aware of the motive space, of the organs that our minds give rise to in retrospective concern, we are inclined to lose our way very dramatically and simply fulfill the motives that gave rise to the organs. Right? If the motive was guilt or shame or the desire to indict or to redeem, yeah, then very likely we will produce in awareness a vignette that supports those motives, and it will be dissected according to those motives, and it will be evaluated according to those motives, but that particular aspect of the situation is usually invisible to us. And so we are in great danger, right? I've seen people lose their lives, take their lives, because of this collapse toward a tunnel vision-like indictment of themselves or others, right? That acquires such profound gravity and awareness that nothing can resist it. It dominates the entirety of one's interiority. So this is part of my concern, right? But there are others. What did they mean, right? What was being encoded in the trope about Lot's wife? Why is it that turning around and looking backwards turned her to salt? Now we can imagine, physicalist interpretations. There was a nuclear explosion. Lot and his children were hidden by rocks. His wife, stepped out from the protection, saw the nuclear explosion, and was destroyed by it. Possibly even turned to ash. But this is not the meaning of the trope. Yeah? The trope is concerned with what transformations occur in awareness, consciousness, and concern when we take a retrospective view, for purposes that are often as invisible to us as they may be unwise and dangerous. There's another feature of this problem, though. Most of us, we have something like a life script, which is a kind of a fairy tale, most often unconsciously preserved and lived out, that involves vignettes from our history. And our attempt to cope with them, primarily as children, but adults do this too, when, we were relatively helpless in terms like dependent on others for our well-being and so forth, emotionally, spiritually, physically, situationally, all of these things. Yeah. So we have these kind of internal fairy tales that are deeply imprinted in the psyche and our emotional selves and our physical bodies, because emotions become physicalized in human forms. Probably animal forms as well, almost certainly. So we are so wedded to these scripts, most of us. And it's possible to form positive scripts and even scripts that work. The problem is that when they're unconscious, we become enchanted by them. And we are likely to continue to play out patterns that are habitually familiar and match our scripts. And we are very likely to reject liberation from those patterns. The main reason is we know how the pattern works, right? And we're not sure how novel improvisation and being human and so forth, quote, works, unquote. It's not predictable. In Wolfram's terms, it's computationally irreducible. Whereas running a script, this is a transactional analysis crib. I cribbed this from TA here. Whereas we know how running a script works. If I play the victim, one of three things will happen. I'm used to all those things. I know how they work. And so we will often live lives in miserable servitude to a script that we are unconsciously running. And anyone who comes along and says, hey, there's another way to do this or whatever, we are likely to reject that. The incredible gravity of how many times we've replayed the scripts and how familiar we are with their outcomes and so forth is very difficult to overcome in awareness, particularly if we are unconscious of the entire process, right? We're not aware that we're doing this. And there are features of consciousness whose basically their job is simply to obscure this in awareness, right? To blur the chalkboard so that we're unaware that we're running a script. And when I talk of these matters, it may seem as if I'm proposing that I've advanced beyond these common human problems. Not so. These discussions are the fruit of my own wrestling with features of my interiority that have plagued me in my life and were really the source of most of the pain and suffering that I have endured and that I have visited on other beings. One might say, in hindsight, unjustifiably. Yes, true. But I had to learn also. There's an argument against that. Stay true to the spirit of your being, heart, and origin. You won't have this unjustified behavior thing. Yes, it's good. It's very challenging to implement, however, especially perfectly. So we have this script problem, right? We're wedded to these scripts. We're unaware of this problem in the same way that we're not usually aware of the motivations of the features of awareness that arise to engage in retrospective courtroom cases. Right? These things are not friendly. They're not beings. They're not humans. They've never worn a shoe, eaten food, or washed a dish. They're functions, right? They're like processes that run in our minds. Naturally, what's going on in the moment, you making this recording, is particularly ironic because as I am attempting to recompose the lost recording, I am retrospectively attempting to recall the highlights or pivots that I previously orbited, right? So without retrospective awareness, I would not be making this recording. Nonetheless, I will proceed in awareness of the terrifying irony of my current situation and see what may be remembered and also what may be seen anew. What I finally realized, which had not occurred to me as a young man, was that I had not shot the mother duck when I fired the gun randomly. What happened was that, I believe, and this involves interpretation of historical vignettes, the mother duck heard the shot and then did what mother birds and mother animals will often do, which is present themselves to the predator as injured, thus attracting their attention away from the children. Yeah. And I think it's very likely that this is what took place. So you can see that in my evaluation of the moment, a misevaluation led to my sin. And the other night, as I was recalling this vignette, in my heart, I sang a complex how can I even describe what took place? I sang my heartfelt apologies in a very profound and poetic way. I'm just recalling what took place. I'm doing the retrospection again in the talk about retrospection. Now, it's not clear that my song ameliorated the harm that was visited, an unimaginable harm. But I'm also capable of evaluating the situation more broadly, not to reduce my culpability, but to give rise to the beauty of awareness, sensitivity, recognition, reconciliation that are naturally part of the possibility space of such historical evaluations. When my mind becomes lawyerly, danger is there. When I start building courtrooms in awareness and finding their processes compelling, submitting to those processes, great danger ensues where great beauty does not prevail. But let's get back to this scripting thing. So there's a problem with humans. If you go to someone who has a serious problem, let's suggest that the problem is they smoke cigarettes addictively. And you come to them and you say, you know, you don't have to do this. I know you're addicted and I get it. And you show them a path out of the cage. They're likely to settle into, even if they're inspired momentarily, they're likely to settle into their habitual patterns, right? And to defend those patterns against transformation. Not because they want to smoke, but because, well, elucidating the anatomy of that problem is very complicated, but they know how it works, right? They're familiar with the whole habit, and it has become an orienting foundational habit in their common experience. Most such addictions are the result of deprivations in meaningful relationships, roles, and missions for human beings. Mostly addiction is it's a displacement of various agonies, self-imposed and not, where the possibility space has collapsed so dramatically that we desire a displacing behavior that is expressive of our pain without necessarily reinforcing it. So this is also a problem in human cognition. We find, when looking at what we can learn about history, I know how ironic it is to mention that here, we find that there are these dominating doctrinal stupidities, really, that become so popular that any challenge to them is immediately derisively ignored or denigrated or made fun of or so forth. Humans will never fly, whatever you pick. Can't go to the moon, impossible, all of these things. The heart isn't a pump, your brain is a computer, right? There's all of this kind of nonsense floating around in the effluent of the human cognitium. And it's very resistant to penetration, even when it is abjectly wrong. Right? Once these processes get started in the cognitium, they're very colonizing and powerful and militaristic. They kill, right? They kill the spirit of insight. They deprive it of nourishment, the nourishment of human awareness and attention and inaction, much like the gun I held as a child did. So they have a kind of gravity. They're very disorienting, and they're very resistant. They are heuristically resistant, right, to the intrusion of anything that would overturn their dominance. Our own minds are like microcosms of the human cognitium in this way. And they inherit familiar processes from the cognitium, like commodity culture, courtrooms, and so forth. Yeah? The aspect of us that engages in retrospective evaluations is not merely lawyerly. The way that it makes parts of a situation and the perspectives it employs are not really the perspectives of beings at all. They're the perspectives of a kind of privileged inquisitor that never has to be human, right? It has no idea what it's like to be human. It's, like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail when you're holding one. And for this inquisitor, everything looks like whatever the motivations that gave rise to its formation in awareness are, or project, right? So the cuts it makes, the parts it makes of experience, and how it relates those parts together, and where it fails to do so, and what it ignores. All of these are crucial features of this problem. But the thing that I actually want to talk about is weirder than all of this. And yesterday I forged a trope that's familiar to me. Should I talk about the 12 orphans problem? All right, so this was the ultimate trope that resulted. This is the little toy I made of what I was shown, and how I was warned about this when I was under the tutelage of Toy Maker. So there's this movie. I won't mention which one it is, but in the film, and a little bit of a spoiler alert here, though this actually doesn't ruin the film. There's a bunch of gunslingers, and one of them is a very bad man. They rob a bank, they get shot up. There's a couple of really skillful gunmen in this crew. And a priest, nurses them back to health. And when they're ready to go, the leader of the group, who's the bad man, he tells the other expert gunman to kill the priest, and he refuses. And so he leaves, that guy leaves the team, And he goes down to South America, and he's got some money from the robbery, and he makes an orphanage. And he has sworn off the use of guns. He'll never use a gun again. So the bad man, later in life, decides to have a contest, and he wants this, who's the best gunman. And he wants this guy here, so he sends some of his henchmen down there to get him. And they come back and they say, no, he won't come. And the bad man says, I don't care if he will or won't come, you bring him here at any cost. So they go down there and they threaten him. Well, if you won't come, we'll kill the children. He's like, well, there's nothing I can really do about that. I'm not going to pick up a gun ever again. They kill the children, they beat him, and they drag him back to the town where the competition is happening. And, various things ensue that are interesting. But primarily, the bad man sets up a situation where the guy either has to pick up a gun or someone else will die. Right? And so, this is the problem. This is a crucial formulation of this problem. When the situation is set up, right, the bad man has his henchmen pointing guns at, say, the common townspeople or whatever, and tells him, I'm just going to keep pulling the trigger until you pick up a gun. Right? So, now this other man, the guy from the orphanage, is faced with a terrible problem. If he picks up the gun now, then why didn't he pick it up previously to rescue the children he loved? Right? So he's trapped in the space between history and the future. Right here, now, he has the ability to stop this killing. But if he does so, the gun in his hand, it weighs the lives of the children that died. Right? That's its weight. Right? He's balanced. Right? He has to make a choice. Either to give up his rejection of the gun and, stop people from being killed now. But if he's going to do that, why didn't he do it then? You see the problem? So we face this kind of problem at all times in our lives, and if we turn backward and look at history, we are frozen. Right? What are we becoming? Well, we are becoming something that is retrospectively looking at the graveyard of history, the losses, the wrongdoing of our own and others and so forth. And we've lost the plot, right? These features that this organ of the mind presents to us, and the very specific lighting and contextual deprivations, right? What's drawn out of the context and ignored, and the very specific injections, right? Of perspective, concern, value, characteristics, and so forth, that this organ of our mind places into the parts that it has dissected for analysis, for litigation, and so forth. It freezes us. Yeah? We are like a dead thing. There's a really brilliant film that deals with this topic called What Dreams May Come, about death and love. Oh, wow. There's like a whole colony of trapdoor spiders here that I'd never noticed before. This is astonishing. I mean, holy shite. Gonna have to make a little film about this. It's funny, I just came across this whole enclave of funnel web spiders. Never seen anything like that. It's totally new. I've never noticed anything like that is probably a more truthful answer. Though, of course, you can see, right, what am I doing here? Retrospectives. I'm turning around to look behind me. Have I ever seen this before? Right? All right, so there's this other feature, right, which is like our spirit, our body, our mind, even our relationships. They are a bit, no, they're not. I can make a toy that analogizes them as the engine of a train, right, a locomotive. And what happens is that as memory develops and as we get older, we attach train cars of memories to this locomotive. We also attach beliefs, ontologies, epistemological toys that mostly suck, unless we're very well educated. All kinds of train cars attached to this locomotive, and it's surprising that the thing even exists, because the self is like this train car dragging, 50,000, this locomotive dragging 50,000 train cars. It can barely move if it moves at all. But it does, right? And so what happens retrospectively is we look backwards from the locomotive, right? Meaning essentially that it has to stop now because there's no one driving it. The attention of the, quote, engineer has been turned backwards. And we feel the weight of that load. And the weight of the entire load can be surreptitiously transferred to a very specific historical vignette, such that it acquires the weight of the entire train, completely unjustifiably, but we can't, quote, tell the difference. Yeah? So we're always operating in a situation that resembles this. Do we turn backwards and look at our mistakes, how things could have been, how they should have been, how they might have been, what we would hope for, what we think was supposed to happen, any of these motives, or do we turn forward into possibility becoming, recognition, communion, intimacy, relation, experiment, and so forth? Yeah. Now, it's important that we can turn around. What we don't want is the sort of death stare that specific events in our memory can give rise to in awareness. Yeah. The other problem is that if someone comes along and says, hey, you don't have to carry all those trains, right? Just think about the guy in the vignette from the film, right? At some point he realizes, I don't have to determine what the past means or what the future means. I can act now, right? And he rescues the person who is in jeopardy at gunpoint. This vignette was so crucial to me because it made me understand how the gun can weigh a history. It can have the weight of an entire history associated with it. Yeah? And we freeze up. We think protectively, and there may be some truth in that, but most of the possibility space of our humanity is easily occluded or inhibited or amputated by concerns about not accidentally or, accidentally on purpose doing the bad thing, the wrong thing, the failing thing, so forth. So there's this delicate balance, right, which we really want to stay near the center of, unless we're, efflorescing, developing, experimenting, playing at being ourselves. We want to stay near the center of the balance and become very concerned when suddenly the balance tips, extremely toward the side of retrospective evaluations, indictments, court cases, litigation, evaluation, so forth. But the thing I want you to see is that, I've experienced this directly in the specific context of my education by Toymaker. I was shown ways of being so profound, right? This is part of the problem for a human. You're given this enormous possibility space, effectively infinite in many directions. So then what do you make of it? And I can look back on the gifts I was given and do the evaluation, right? Forge that inquisitor, and just see myself as terrible person, abject failure to enact the gifts I was given. If my goal is indictment, that is what I will see. And it seems true, real, inescapably factual, but it is not. The matter is vastly more sophisticated than that. So the reason that Toymaker introduced this to me was to try to explain that if you go to humans and you give them toys that will liberate them, they'll probably attack you. Now, if you set up the context really carefully and everybody has opted in and they're on the same page, so to speak, things go more smoothly with the introduction of insight. But if you just go around to people and present to them a way of seeing that liberates them from their traps, they're not unlikely at all to nail you to a tree. Those traps are their best friends, right? They're all in on repeating the historical, sequences, that are encoded in the scripts that we play out, our personal fairy tales, so to speak. And it's not just the humans that are like this. We become like this when we are surrounded by humans that are like this. It's very difficult. There's a feature of human mindedness that can't help but inherit the qualities and structures and delusions that infect the people who surround us. We have this idea that minds are separate things in our heads and blah, blah, blah. That's just bullshit. There's no separate mind anywhere. I dare you to try to find one. We've got that backwards. That's a prevailing doctrine that has survived, in a very similar way to what Stephen Wolfram describes when he talks about the difference between computational reducibility, things you can predict once you know the pattern, and computational irreducibility, things that are formally impossible to predict, no matter what you know about them. Right? And most of the future is like that, but there is a space within that manifold that is accessible to reducibility. And we transfer that expectation of reducibility. This has been a problem in science for, 200 years. We're going to figure out how to know everything. No, you won't. You're going to encounter a hard limit to predictive analysis. And there's a similar hard limit to retrospective analysis. You'll never get your mind around the variables, right? The characteristics of the situation. It's infinitely complex. But the feature of mind that arises when we engage in this kind of behavior doesn't care. It's fully willing to produce completed, concretized graveyards of indictments in court cases and so forth, whether we are the defendant or the plaintiff. And I have myself a collection of these. And they're very troubling, right? And knowing what I know doesn't confer complete immunity to me, but what it does is it maintains the structure, it maintains the viability of the many organs of my awareness, and it preserves them and protects them when my mind begins collapsing into the inquisitor, so to speak. Okay, insight. So the reason that Toymaker was showing me this was that, not that humans will kill you if you try to make them smarter. And children, by the way, I have a whole parable about this. You could look it up. It's called, what? The Great Flamingo Fisherman. Yeah, there's a parable, the toy that came out of this lesson that I was given in various ways over time. Yeah, The Great Flamingo Fisherman. There's probably only one such article on the web, so you can find it. Children are not likely, they're not like the adults, right? Young people are not like the adults. If you go to them with insight, they will likely play with it. They're already aware that what the adults are doing is largely captured and poisonous and so forth. And they're interested in keys to liberation. And they can conserve them in awareness and be fascinated by them and play with them. It's the post-teens, it's the young adults and the adults and older people. Though again, you have a similar splay, right, in the elderly. Many of the elderly have become children again. Some of them are extremely crystallized into their scripts and habits, but some of them really are starving for a doorway into awareness and being and love and all of these things, as we all do to differing degrees. But it wasn't because humans will kill you that he showed me this. He wanted me to see the problem so that I could apply solutions in my own experience and also avoid certain traps that would naturally arise due to my love affair with insight. And he showed me how when you give someone a key to a prison that they're very familiar with and very, what's the word? They are enchanted by. They have composed this prison over time. They know it very well. It matches there's a reasonable match with the weird features of society and, civilization, commerce and law and the military and so forth. All of these things, yeah. So when you bring humans a gift and you think, of course, I found liberty and beauty and value and creativity by playing with this, surely you will too. There are in the mind an array of sentinels that watch over the structure of the established habits and scripts. And in a sense, these faculties in awareness have jobs, right? They get paid in attention energy for doing these processes. And so without these processes, those features of awareness, as if they were persons, are afraid they will die, right? And so this amplifies the charge of the situation dramatically, because secretly, to the person experiencing this, it is as if there are persons inside you who will die if you change. So there are sentinels that watch for threats to the script. And they have a broad array of strategies and algorithms that they employ to deflect threats that would undermine or disclose that we've been living in a trapped script. No one would do that if they were aware of it, right? It would sort of become like one of the primary imperatives of being a being, is to not do that. Now, part of the reason this exists is that humans have the capacity to offload certain aspects of our agency into processes, right? And that reduces our necessary investments of vigilance, concern, awareness, sensitivity, creativity, intelligence, and so forth. And so there's a kind of a cost-benefit relationship here. The problem is, as you can see in looking at the modern humans, they want to do this with everything and turn the world into machines, which is an incredibly stupid and immiserating idea for all organisms. Having the occasional machine isn't necessarily a problem. Machines aren't bad in and of themselves. It's sort of like a gun, right? It doesn't do anything if it's just sitting in a drawer, but there are children around. And in this case, the children are the history and future of life on Earth. They are all the children and all the parents and all the beings that have ever existed here. So, if we're going to compose guns, we have to ensure that they don't go everywhere and just become a dominant process in human, thought, behaviors, everything. But they do. On our world, they do. So when one has the capacity to bring insight to others, to give them medicine, to heal their hearts, and to restore the profound liberty of their agency, it's very dangerous for everybody. This process has to be managed with delicate awareness and setting the stage carefully. One of the best ways to set the stage turns out to be to tell a fairy tale, right? Like fairy tales can be destroyed by better fairy tales, right? So if you reveal to someone that, you're kind of living a script here, most of your liberties are occluded, you're just kind of reenacting this pattern over and over again, which all of us do. We can tell them a story where they have the insight, right? Instead of transmitting the insight directly in a more or less masculine way, we transmit it indirectly and invite their awareness to entertain the dream, right? To entertain the opposite of the figure in the mind, the vignette, which is given rise to by the urges that orbit inquisition. Indirection almost always wins in the long run, and declaration tends to win in the short run. But declaration resembles a command, right? And nobody wants to be commanded. Exceptions noted. There's a lot of music in the background. Not sure if it'll come through in the recording. Okay, where am I going to go now? So, we are trained to preserve fictions that cripple us and deprive us of agency, creativity, play, love, which then becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling process, much like a factory. Yeah? It produces what it was built to produce, which are instances that match the the sort of bad, debilitating fairy tales that we compose, often in childhood, but we nurse them and nurture them and recompose them throughout our entire lives. Most of us do. It's part of being a separate person, but it's also caused by being sort of forced in some ways to be an individual, which is not the natural state for human beings by a long shot. So there's, even these problems, they have origins, and they were much less common when humans were together a lot. Yeah. Let's take a few moments to recompose. All right. You see, when we turn around in consciousness and shine the light of concern and evaluation on historical matters, we are representing them. Yeah? And this is the fundamental problem with humans, this whole representation thing. The representations are not the things themselves, but they take on, in our emotional and evaluative aspects, the features of something that's happening now. In fact, when we entertain a memorial vignette, our now becomes consumed by the vision of the event, right? To varying degrees and to varying depths and so forth. But if it's something very highly charged, it can completely overwhelm the immediate, our perspectival complexity, potential perspectival complexity, and really just capture awareness altogether. Okay? And then we cannot tell the difference, I cannot tell the difference, between who I am and the evaluation produced in this retrospective courtroom. Right? Consider the example I gave earlier of me with the BB gun. Right? I can't tell that I am not doing that now. It feels like I'm doing it forever when the vignette is in my awareness. It's a kind of this is probably the feature of human awareness that religion captured in order to produce hells. So this is why it's dangerous, right? There's we become intoxicated, if you will, in various kinds of ways, depending on what is orienting, what are the motives of retrospective, dreaming, memory, so forth. All right, let me think about now where I'm going. Not as easy as it was yesterday, by a long shot. I think I'll pause and recompose, hopefully to return shortly. I'm an adult, quote unquote. I'm 60x years of age. I've had a strange life. My childhood was good. It was my adult life that was troubling. Though, I had suffering in childhood and so forth too, but not because of a bad situation, really. Yet, when I recompose the vignette about the mother duck, a variety of very strange things happen. Who is the audience, that is observing the recomposition of events in awareness? And one of the aspects of me that is observing, something like my soul or my child's heart, pure, innocent, loving, never wants to harm. And for this aspect to be placed in front of the movie screen, a bit like the scenes at the end of Clockwork Orange, where McDowell's character is just being shown endless scenes of violence with his eyes, trapped in the open state.
I like that
This doesn't go well. It doesn't accomplish the reconciliation or redemption. It torments my spirit. It's agonizing. And this is egregious. This is not helpful. Or rather, what I make of it determines whether it's egregious or helpful. And I wouldn't want to be without the ability to have this kind of experience interiorly, emotionally, memorially. But I would like to not confuse the production with who I am. Yeah. So this is very important, central. And I would also not like to lose all of my liberty as the organ of consciousness engaged in this production of memorial retrospection is vicious and not human, right? It basically, what it wants is to keep its job. And it will definitely keep its job if its production is impactful, much in the way that, film studios produce tedious and violent garbage because it's impactful, right? They might mix in a little bit of, emotional depth or relational depth or something, and some of the originary imperatives of humans. Bit of a problem here in the water. Okay, easily distracted by goings on about me.
And then when is that kind of getting done?
So I want you to see the features of the stage and the spotlights and how these are manipulated by an aspect of consciousness that isn't a human or a being at all. It's a process. And it wins anytime it convinces us that its productions are impactful. They don't have to be good or true or anything at all. They just have to impress us. Yeah. This is like a kind of an evil magician, right? When it is doing that sort of thing. Again, I wouldn't want to be without these abilities, but it's very important that we educate each other about their dangers, right? And what they will do when what is likely to occur when they are not intelligently and relationally informed, like when there's no rebubblization happening, right? The thing just collapses toward indictment, and then it, ratchets down 5 more steps, and now the indictment is, eternal, and then it ratchets down 5 more steps, and now it means, whatever derivation we pull from it. I'm a bad person, I should do X when X is completely ridiculously wrong. Whatever, opt out. I had a very close friend who I adored, one of my closest friends. I spent thousands of hours talking with William. And William experienced mental environments in which paranoia and schizophrenia, schizophreniform, processes that captured his mind. Probably at least partly due to brain damage in childhood, and partly perhaps due to genetic predilections or inherited predilections. And, William kept recomposing the Christian threats about sin in his mind again and again and again. And he was relatively helpless, right? It wasn't as if he had any choice. These processes had captured the fundamental root of his awareness and just generated endless, indictments and accusations against him. I knew William for about 20 years. He was one of my greatest teachers. He took his life last August. In August of 2023 on the 8th. He was a truly heroic and beautiful spirit. I learned things with him that would have been completely impossible for me to learn by mere study. And I revere his memory and celebrate his life. But that also involves retrospection. Right? So it's not actually just retrospection that I'm questioning here. This idea that hindsight is 20/20, it's because hindsight provides a sort of abstract helicopter view over circumstances when it's not primarily concerned with producing judgments, evaluations, or indictments. And without the capacity for some kind of hindsight, we would fail to be able to physically navigate, a 5-step walk. Right? So these features, they're not intrinsically bad. I don't want to give that idea. It's just that rather I want us to see how, when they are not intelligently organized, when they are not insightfully organized, and compassionately and lovingly organized, they produce monsters, and then they shine the monster light on us. Yeah? And there's almost nothing as compelling as that other than, great physical pain or something, possibly ecstasy. Actually, ecstasy is extremely compelling. I don't mean the drug, by the way. I mean the stuff the ancients were on about. Where to go? So yes, I want us to see that these are the aspects that demonize others, and they can easily demonize ourselves. When this is the motivation, and again, that motivation is almost always occluded when memorial events rise in consciousness and are being reconsidered. Right? Oh yeah, the representation thing. Okay, so the other thing is history is sort of like a graveyard of finished, closed situations. We are trained to think this way. And when we turn back on history to inquire into it, we are not aware of this problem. Yeah? We are like children, right? The power of the vignette in memory is like a dream we are having now. It is as if we are re-experiencing what took place before, if we're really in the experience, right, and not so much in the evaluation. But these two things can become merged, right, so that we can't tell the difference between experience and inquisition or analysis. And the analysis produces new experience. So if I just roll, if I just roll the film on the terrible thing with the mother duck, what happens is I'm re-experiencing that trauma. And it was traumatic for me, not as traumatic as it was for the duck and her children. But it was deeply traumatizing for me. So through my own behavior, I traumatized others and myself. It was a very painful thing to directly admit. But true, from some perspectives of concern, in experiencing memorial retrospection. Now, of course, I can also remember events of great beauty or where I was paying attention and didn't, defect into whatever the hell was compelling me at the moment. Okay, so let me see, right? I have to keep comparing my talk to yesterday to try to find, to try to resurrect the paths. Oh, right, the graveyard thing. Okay, so when we turn around, so to speak, and we look at history, these things are kind of set in stone, and this is what is made, this is what is brought into awareness by the trope with Lot and his wife. They didn't say his wife turned to stone. They said, or apparently someone wrote, that she turned into a pillar of salt. A very interesting thing. Salt draws the moisture out of other things. It draws the life out of them, in a way. Right? Solid salt also gives life. You need salt. I suspect that what they're trying to illustrate is that retrospective awareness has as one of its dangers the capacity to freeze us, destroy us, ruin our experience. And, okay, now I see the pivot here. So there's a pivot underneath this. It goes something like this. Given the choice between endless retrospective courtrooms of indictment for yourself and others, or direct, creative, insightful action forward in time, right? Your liberty space is forward in time. When you're focused on retrospect, your liberties collapse. You are, in a sense, frozen. Even in the moment of such focus, I dare you to try to get away with conducting physical activities when compelled by a memorial vignette. Right? It collapses the space of our liberty very dramatically without announcing this. And, we should maintain an intelligent awareness of these matters and teach each other and our children about them. We cannot be human if we are trapped in this way. And these aspects of our humanity are weaponized by religion, ideology, politics, commerce, and so forth. So this is truly, we're very, very vulnerable in this way. The possibility space for my mind and being during the recollection of a memorial event is radically different from the possibility space when I say, if I am composing a meal, or I am having a conversation with a friend or companion, or even if I am arbitrating features of memorial cognition as I am doing now, right? The possibility space is in front of me. Now, this doesn't mean there's no value in the historical stuff. We just have to be really careful about understanding how the stage is set up. Who and why are the spotlights being, who's managing the lighting, and why are they making the changes they're making? What is their purpose? And the primary purpose I want to point out the danger of is indictment. Judgment. Resurrecting a memorial memory, resurrecting a memory in consciousness is an action. It's a behavior. And it produces certain kinds of things that aren't actually rewards, but are so compelling that they can be confused with something like a reward, right? A product, they produce a product. And when the product matches with our expectations, we may feel validated, but most often that feeling is deceptive because, especially if we're just reiterating a habitual structure of concern or awareness, evaluation, and so forth. This is so dangerous for us, for our children. Having historical memory is amazing and can be very profound, but it is also most of what produces the traps that we live out as scripts in our lives. And we would, almost all of us, somehow given the opportunity to simply drop the script and improvise. If we had learned to be comfortable doing so, we would prefer this in every case. And this is what Zen and enlightenment sort of orbit in a way as well. But even I am wedded to my scripts, and I'm strangely married to certain evaluations. Very few of them are indictments of others, though I'm extremely sort of personally upset by what our species is up to in general, in the present and over history, because that's a cluster fork of disaster and cruelty and completely egregious nonsense, where it isn't beautiful and amazing. So these are some of my thoughts for today. I don't know whether I have lived up to my goal. I've tried. I've had a go at it. I think I was much more inspired yesterday, and today, as I retrospectively attempt to resurrect the pivots of yesterday's lost talk, ironically, this is where I have come to. So grateful for those of you who listen and attend and are curious and insightful. I hope that you get something amazing from your listening and your reflection on these matters. And if you find a key, then I will be truly joyful. That lets you out of some trap and rescues others from the traps that are common to our nature as human beings. Then that would be brilliant. By all means, exceed me, please. That is the greatest contribution you could make. But tickle the algorithm, if you will. Leave a question or comment or criticism, and I will respond to everything. I'm very grateful to be here, to be alive together, and to have this chance to reflect on some of the more peculiar features of our human interiority today. Thank you for joining me. I wish you beauty and fulfillment, insight and love. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.